shooting, and I ran. I just ran. I think he shot everybody. I'm so scared. I know. I got screamed by a bullet. She said she got raised by a bullet. He started firing and she ran to the neighbors. But he point blank shot my friend out right in front of me. I mean, I'm scared to death. So I like, so Amanda shot Amanda, and he shot Lindy Dobbins, our other friend that was there with us. I'm hiding in a closet at the neighbor's house. I'm scared to death.
Rachel Hendricks was on the phone with 911 as she tried to explain what had just happened inside the house, saying she thought everyone had been hit and that she was hiding, still afraid that he was somewhere nearby and might come back at any moment. Only minutes earlier, that same house had been full, with 4 people moving from room to room, talking, trying to calm Amanda down after what she had found that morning. Then everything changed without warning. The glass at the back of the house broke apart, and before anyone could process it, a voice followed from outside, loud and demanding, asking one question over and over: where is he? But Lamar didn't wait to think. He ran. Amanda moved away from him. Rachel and Lindy ran upstairs, looking for somewhere to hide, somewhere that might give them a few seconds, but 2 of them would not make it out. Amanda was hit 9 times, and Lindy Dobbins, her close friend who had only come over to support her, was also killed. And what made it harder to understand was what had happened just before. Less than 2 hours earlier, the same man had been standing in a courtroom, calm and composed, answering questions clearly, listening to instructions, and walking out like everything was under control. Then he got into his car, drove back to South Bellagio Drive in St. Augustine, Florida, and carried out a crime that still haunts the community and seasoned detectives till today. Before we get into it, if you end up finding this video engaging, feel free to leave a like and share your thoughts on the case in the comments. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more content like this. Thank you. This video is intended strictly for educational and documentary purposes. It does not support, promote, or justify any of the actions or individuals involved. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, to understand how it got to that moment, you had to go back to where it all started, and that was the house on South Bellagio Drive in Mura Bella, a quiet part of St. Augustine where nothing like this was supposed to happen. Amanda Colley lived there with her children, Trey and Avery, and for years, that house had been the center of their family life. She had been married to James Terry Colley Jr. for 8 years, and from the outside, everything looked steady. But by mid-2015, the marriage had reached a point where they were no longer living together. And on the surface, it looked like a clean separation. Amanda stayed in the house on South Bellagio Drive with the children, trying to keep their routine steady, while James moved out and went to live with his sister a few miles away. That distance should have created space, but it didn't settle anything, and it didn't reduce the tension that had already been building for months. Because even after moving out, James didn't step back. He kept calling, and he kept showing up, and he kept asking questions. However, Amanda was trying to move forward with her life. She had met Lamar Duberly through work earlier that year, and what started as a professional connection gradually became something more personal. They spent time together, they got closer, and eventually they began seeing each other. From Amanda's perspective, this happened after the separation, and it was part of her trying to rebuild a sense of normal life.
The relationship started professionally, progressed into a personal relationship. And then we began seeing each other.
But from James's perspective, it became something he couldn't accept. And that contradiction sat at the center of everything. He had already started moving on himself, and there were indications he was seeing someone else, a new girlfriend named Amy. But that didn't change how he reacted to Amanda's life. But the warning signs were already there. Amanda had gone to court and filed for a domestic injunction, and that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came after a series of incidents. There had been threats, and there had been messages, and there had been moments where his behavior crossed from persistent into something more serious. At one point, he had taken Amanda's clothes and burned them outside, and that wasn't just an argument or a reaction. It was a deliberate act that showed anger and control at the same time. On another occasion, he entered the home looking for her, going through the space as if he still had a right to be there, even after the separation had already been made clear. The messages, too, they weren't just attempts to talk anymore. They carried pressure, and sometimes they carried warning. Call me or I'm going to come find you. And it didn't stop at one message. He kept calling, and he kept texting, and he kept pushing for a response, and the pattern became clear.
You won't do nothing to me, I won't do nothing to you. I won't bring you something to court about what you really are. And we both know what you really are. You're lucky I don't tell our children about this, Amanda. You're disgusting. That's what you are. Please talk to me. Please talk to me. Please, this is the last time I'm telling her today. Please.
So by the time August 27th, there were already clear signs that things were escalating rather than resolving. And then something happened that made everything even worse. A neighbor noticed a man outside Amanda's house mowing the lawn, shirtless, in the middle of the day, and it stood out just enough for someone to take a picture. That man was Lamar Dauberly. But the photo didn't stay there. It got shared, then passed along, and eventually it reached James. And when it did, it wasn't just a picture anymore. It became something else in his mind. It became confirmation of what he had already been asking about, what he had already been trying to figure out, and what he hadn't been able to let go of. So he started paying closer attention, and he became more aware of who was coming and going, and what had once been uncertainty turned into something more fixed in his mind. Around 4 a.m. on August 27th, while the neighborhood was still quiet and most people were asleep, James drove to Amanda's house, and when he got there, she wasn't home, but that didn't stop him from going inside. He moved through the house, and he didn't stay in one place for long, because he was looking for something specific. So he went from room to room, opening closets, pulling open drawers, checking anything that might give him an answer. And then he found it. Not just one thing, but enough to confirm what he had already been thinking about for weeks. There were men's clothes, and there were personal items that didn't belong to him, and in that moment, whatever doubt had been there before was melted. And instead of leaving, instead of stepping back, he started tearing the place apart. He knocked things over, damaged what was around him, and left the house in a state that didn't look like a search anymore. It looked like anger. Televisions were damaged, furniture was moved, and trash was scattered across the floor, but nothing was taken. Nothing was removed, because that wasn't the point. It wasn't about stealing, it was about reacting to what he had just seen. Then, after all of that, he left the house, and for a moment, it could have ended there. But it didn't, because even after walking away, he didn't calm down, and whatever he had seen inside that house stayed with him, and it continued to build as the morning went on. Around 9 a.m., Amanda pulled into the driveway and walked back into the house. And the change was immediate because nothing looked the way she had left it. Things were out of place, rooms felt disturbed, and it was clear that someone had been inside, not just briefly, but long enough to move through the space and leave it unsettled. So she reached for her phone and called Lamar, and she showed him what she was seeing, trying to explain it as she walked through the house, and he didn't hesitate. He came over. Then Amanda called her friends, Lindy Dobbins and Rachel Hendricks, and they came to the house to be with her, because at that point, it wasn't something she wanted to deal with alone. When they arrived, they talked through it, compared what they were seeing, and tried to make sense of it in real time, and for a moment, having others there made it feel more manageable, like it could be handled step by step. She wasn't alone anymore, but it didn't change the fact that whoever had done this knew the house, knew her routine, had already crossed a line, and he could do even worse. At almost the same time Amanda was walking through the damage in her home, James was somewhere else entirely, standing inside a courtroom for a violation of the injunction that had been put in place to keep him away from her earlier. He stood in front of the judge, and there was nothing chaotic about his behavior, nothing rushed or out of control, because he answered the questions clearly, listened to what was being said, and followed the process step by step. When he was asked about his condition, he denied being under the influence of anything, and his responses stayed consistent. Then he accepted the outcome of the hearing, and that outcome did not involve jail time, which meant he was free to leave once it was over. So he walked out of that courtroom like any other person who had just completed a hearing, and nothing in that moment pointed toward what would come next. There was no indication that anything had escalated beyond what had already been addressed in that room, but the decisions he made immediately after leaving told a very different story, and the gap between those two moments became one of the most important parts of understanding how everything unfolded. And from there, he went to his sister's house, the same place he had been staying since the separation, and at some point during that stop, he had access to weapons, 2 handguns that would later become central to what happened next. Then he got back into the car and pulled out again, and this time the direction was clear because he was heading back towards South Bellagio Drive, a drive of roughly 15 miles that gave him time, not just to get there, but to think about where he was going and what he was about to do. He could have turned around or slowed down or decided not to continue, but he didn't stop. And during that drive, he spoke to his father, and the tone of that conversation was different because his father was pleading, trying to reach him before he got any further. He told him to come back, told him that people understood what he was going through, trying to give him a reason to turn around before anything else happened. And a dog walker witnessed this and would eventually be vital on court.
I was just hearing him say, please son, come back and get your truck. Don't do this. Everybody knows what you...
But his response made it clear where his mind was at that point. He said, I just can't take this anymore. And then the call ended, and with it, whatever chance there was for him to change direction.
The person on the other end was doing most of the talking, but it was yelling, so I couldn't hear everything the person said. The only thing I heard clearly is he said, I can't effing take this anymore.
Back at the house on South Bellagio Drive, the atmosphere had settled slightly, at least on the surface, because Amanda was no longer alone, and she had Lamar with her, along with Rachel Hendricks and Lindy Dobbins, and together they were moving through the rooms, talking through what had happened earlier that morning. Then suddenly, the glass at the back of the house broke, and the sound cut through the conversation before anyone had time to react, and almost immediately after that, Rachel saw him, standing outside, focused, already firing into the house. And then his voice followed, loud and direct, asking the same question again and again, where is he? Lamar understood what that meant without needing anything else explained, so he moved immediately, turning and running through the house toward the garage, because staying in place wasn't an option.
Standing approximately here, it did not sound like a gunshot to me initially. I picked up the first bullet hole. The second bullet hole appeared closer to where I was standing.
He got through the garage and out, leaving the house behind, and once he was outside, he didn't come back.
I thought that I was the targeted individual, and so I wasn't armed.
Shots were fired from the outside into the house. And
Okay. Do you know who it was?
yeah, I got a great idea who it was.
Okay, are they still there?
I don't know. I left. I had to run.
And so there's
Shooting
a
after me.
the gunshots didn't hit anybody, correct?
No, they hit the back and glass shattered everywhere. They hit the sliding glass window. I think the shots were aimed at me.
Inside, Amanda moved in a different direction, heading toward the bathroom, trying to get out of sight, while Rachel and Lindy went upstairs, looking for somewhere they could close off and hold. They ended up in the closet, and Rachel pushed against the door, trying to keep it shut, while Lindy stayed behind her, both of them holding on to the idea that if they could just keep that door closed, they might have a chance.
Amanda was, very upset, crying, saying that he's not in here. I don't know. He's not in here. At one point, I believe Mr. Colley came over and tried to get into the closet door, and Amanda said, he's not in there. That's Rachel and Lindy. And at that time, I heard a shot, and that was all I heard of Amanda.
Rachel kept holding the door, pushing back with everything she had, but then a shot came through, and it struck her arm, forcing her to lose her grip. In that moment, the barrier between them was gone, and he forced his way in.
Mr. Colley was trying to get into the bathroom door, saying, open the door, I'm going to shoot. So he shot through the door, and the bullet grazed my arm.
When he entered the closet, his focus shifted past Rachel and toward Lindy, and Lindy spoke, trying to identify herself, saying, "It's me. It's Lindy," as if recognition might change something. But it didn't. And that was the moment Rachel moved. She stepped away, left the closet, and ran out of the house, not stopping, not looking back, and she kept going until she reached a neighbor's home. She got on the phone, trying to explain what had happened, still asking for help, her voice carrying everything that had just unfolded inside those walls.
You need some information so they know what's going on. The mom just left her house. She just left her house because her husband ran out of the house last night. It just came up under the report with her. He was in the house shooting and I just ran. I think he shot everybody. I'm so scared. I got screamed by a bullet. She said she got ready to let a bullet. He started firing and she ran to the neighbors. But he point blank shot my friend that was right in front of me. I mean, I'm scared to death. So so he shot Amanda, he shot Lindy Dobbins, our other friend that was there with us. I'm hiding in a closet at the neighbor's house. I'm scared to death.
But inside the house, Amanda was still there, and the situation had not ended. When deputies arrived on South Bellagio Drive, the house was already quiet again, and the person they were looking for was no longer there because he had left before anyone could reach the scene. They moved through the rooms quickly, checking each space, calling out, trying to understand what had happened in the short time between the first emergency call and their arrival. But the situation inside the house made it clear almost immediately that this was no longer about preventing anything. It was about responding to what had already taken place. Amanda did not survive, suffering 9 gunshots. And Lindy Dobbins, who had come over that morning to support her friend, also did not survive. And the weight of that reality settled in as the scene was secured. Rachel Hendricks had made it out, but she was injured, and her call to 911 had already set the response in motion, while Lamar Dauberly had escaped earlier, getting out through the garage and away from the house before things reached that point. So, in a matter of minutes, everything had shifted from a situation that seemed contained to something that had affected multiple lives in a way that could not be reversed. The focus for law enforcement moved quickly because the person responsible had already left, and that meant the scene on South Bellagio Drive was only one part of the situation. So, the focus became where he had gone next, how far he had gotten, and how quickly they could find him before the situation moved beyond that neighborhood. But the search didn't stay local for long. It expanded beyond St. Augustine because there was a clear possibility that he had already left the area, and that changed how the response was handled, with alerts going out and agencies coordinating across state lines. And while that search was still developing, another call came in, this time from much farther away. A driver in Virginia reported that someone had been driving aggressively to the point where it nearly forced her off the road. And that kind of report might not usually connect to something like this, but the timing and the description raised enough concern for officers to follow up. So police located the vehicle and initiated a stop. And when they approached, it became clear very quickly that this wasn't a routine traffic situation. The person inside the car was James Colley, and with that, the search that had started hours earlier came to a stop. Inside the vehicle, officers found weapons, and those details connected back to what had happened in Florida, closing the distance between the scene on South Bellagio Drive and the person responsible. He was taken into custody at that point, and with that arrest, the immediate question of where he had gone was answered, but it didn't close the case. The case moved to trial in July 2018 inside the St. Johns County courtroom in St. Augustine, the same place where everything had started, and from the beginning, the defense did not spend time arguing about who had carried out the acts because that part was already clear.
There wasn't any question who did that. The question is, why did it happen? How could this happen? How could a person that loved his family more than anything in his life do that? How could a person who loves his kids more than anything in his life, coaches football, coaches baseball, takes them to Disney, goes on trips, make them orphans. How could that happen? He has to ask the same question a number of times. As he's looking at him, he realizes, oh, yeah, he seems a little nervous, but there seems to be a little more. He's sweating profusely. He's jittery. Just something didn't seem right. And how that can cause memory loss, how it can cause sleepwalking, how it can cause acts that people have no recollection of. In other words, at the time of these events, I can tell you that it's very possible that JR didn't know what he was doing or didn't know what he was intending to do.
Instead, they shifted the focus to something else, and that was why it had happened, and whether it could be explained by what they described as an emotional breakdown, combined with medication, alcohol, and the possibility of a sleep-related state that affected his awareness. So their argument wasn't about denial, it was about interpretation, about trying to show that what happened that morning did not meet the standard of premeditation, and that his state of mind was compromised in a way that changed how his actions should be understood. They brought in expert testimony to support that position, and they pointed to the pressure, the emotional buildup, and the events leading up to that day as part of a larger picture they wanted the jury to consider. But the state approached the case differently, and instead of focusing on explanations, they focused on actions, because they laid out everything step by step, starting with the early morning entry into the house, then moving through the courtroom appearance, the phone calls, the drive, and finally the return to South Bellagio Drive.
There was a loud shatter of glass shattering and a small explosion, like a bang, coming from the outside in. So I looked out back from, obviously the glass was shattered and falling on the floor. So I looked out back and I saw Mr. Colley standing in the backyard with a handgun shooting into the living room.
Then another person who spoke in court was James Colley's friend, Mike.
He just wanted me to come outside and look in the front seat of his truck.
Right. Did he tell you why he wanted you to look in the front seat of his truck?
Not at the beginning, he just kept telling me to get out there and look what I did or look what I found.
Okay. And he was upset about discovering these items, is that correct?
It was, yes, sir.
Did he tell you where he found these toys?
He did.
Where did he tell you he found them?
He told me he had ransacked the house and he found this inside the house.
How did you respond to that?
Basically that, well, there's her proof, you know, that she's cheating and we're, big deal. Who cares? Go home. He was agitated. He was upset. And he was, real antsy, but he was upset. He was crying, from what I recall.
They showed how each part connected to the next, and how each decision created a path that led directly to what happened inside the house. They pointed to the court hearing that morning, where he appeared calm and aware, and they connected that to what came after, arguing that nothing about his behavior suggested confusion or impairment. Then they moved to the drive, the distance, the time, and the opportunity to stop, and they emphasized that those opportunities were there at multiple points, but were not taken.
I don't want you to forget about all the choices he made on August 27th, all the time he had to reflect. Don't forget that he could have left court and gone to work. Don't forget he could have let his issues with Amanda go. You heard he had a new girlfriend as well. They had plans to go to the wedding. Could have let it go, but he couldn't. Don't forget that he returned to that house on Garrison and obtained those firearms. That he drove 15 miles. It's a long time to think about what you're about to do. Don't forget that when he didn't find Lamar inside the home, that didn't stop him. He could have left, he could have run out the front door looking for him. But it didn't stop him. When he couldn't find Lamar, he continued to hunt and hunt for him. Decisions. His dad begged him not to do it. People are telling him to stop, but he's not listening.
So while the defense asked the jury to consider why, the state asked them to look at how and to follow each step from the beginning of that morning to the end. The jury listened to both sides, to the witnesses, to the experts, and to the sequence that had been presented. And when it came time to deliberate, they did not take long. They returned with a verdict finding James Terry Colley Jr. guilty on all counts, including the first-degree murders of Amanda Colley and Lindy Dobbins. And with that decision, the case moved into the next phase, where the outcome would go beyond guilt and into what punishment would follow.
James Terry Colley Jr. as follows as to count 1 of the indictment. Guilty as charged of both first-degree premeditated murder and first-degree felony murder contrary to Florida statutes.
The same jury returned for the penalty phase in late July 2018, back in the St. Johns County courtroom in St. Augustine. The state laid out the aggravating factors step by step, pointing to the way the crimes were carried out, the number of people affected, the setting inside the home, and the fact that a court order had already been in place. And they argued that those elements showed a level of planning and intent that carried significant weight. But the defense asked the jury to look at the other side of the balance, and they presented testimony about his background, his family role, and the argument that his mental state had been affected by medication, alcohol, and pressure leading up to that day. And they framed those points as reasons to consider a sentence other than death.
Remember a time when your mom acted violently towards your dad in the presence of jail?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
There was a time my father had been having a marital affair. My mother was called and informed. I saw her sitting on the stairs with a baseball bat. My mom began hitting my father with a baseball bat. And my mom came to the house to see us for Thanksgiving, and her and my father got into another confrontation. My dad wasn't going to let her come into the home. And my mother grabbed a knife.
So the jury had both sets of information in front of them, and they had to decide how much each side mattered and how those factors should be weighed against each other. When they reached their decision, it was clear and unanimous because they recommended death sentences for both the murder of Amanda Colley and the murder of Lindy Dobbins, and the court later imposed those sentences, formalizing what the jury had decided. After that, the case moved into the appeal process, perhaps, whether anything in the trial had been handled incorrectly or whether the outcome should be reconsidered. The higher court reviewed the record, looked at the arguments raised by the defense, and examined the way the case had been presented. But after going through each point, they upheld the convictions and the sentences, confirming that the decisions made in that St. Johns County courtroom would stand. As of now, James Terry Colley Jr. is on death row in Florida. He is being held at Union Correctional Institution, which is the state's primary facility for male death row inmates. And when you look at what was left behind, the impact didn't stop at the house on South Bellagio Drive because 5 children lost their mothers that day, and that reality extends far beyond the timeline of events that led up to it. Everything that happened that morning had been building over time, through actions, through decisions, and through warning signs that were already there before the first call to 911 was ever made. And that's where this case comes to a close. What do you think about everything that happened? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story stayed with you, there are more cases on the channel that explore situations just as disturbing. Make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and share the video. It helps keep stories like this from fading away. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.